The first thing Jonah Mercer noticed was not the bride standing alone at the altar. It was the parcel number on the mortgage paper shaking in her hand. Lydia Hale was supposed to be married within minutes. Instead, Grant Voss had vanished, leaving behind an empty place beside her, a church full of whispers, and a document claiming Lydia had borrowed money to purchase land 3 weeks earlier. She insisted she had never borrowed $1 for land. Jonah might have believed the paper was simply someone else's mistake until he read the legal description. He knew that ground. It lay north of Mercer Ranch, close enough to affect the road his cattle used to reach water in dry weather. More troubling, Jonah knew the tract had belonged to the same old estate for years. It had never been advertised. It had never been offered to Lydia. As far as Jonah knew, it had never been for sale at all. Yet the mortgage carried Lydia Hale's name, her personal information, and what appeared to be her signature. Jonah looked toward the church doors Grant Voss had disappeared through and felt the first cold certainty that the abandoned wedding might not be the worst thing that had happened to Lydia that morning. By the time the church bell stopped ringing, Lydia Hale had already removed her veil. By the time the church bell stopped ringing, Lydia Hale had already removed her veil. She folded it once, then twice, and laid it across the empty pew beside her. Outside, the last wedding guests drifted toward Main Street in small, whispering groups. No one came back to ask whether she needed help. Her suitcase was still locked inside the room Grant had rented above the Mercantile, and the key had vanished with him before the ceremony ever began properly. Near the front doors, Lydia heard 2 women speaking softly enough to pretend they were not speaking about her. One said Grant must have discovered something terrible before the vows. The other answered that the bank had mentioned Lydia's name that morning. A debt, perhaps. Maybe land. Lydia's fingers tightened around the folded mortgage paper. She could have crossed the aisle and demanded they look at her. Instead, she slipped the document into her sleeve and asked Jonah where the nearest boarding house was, without looking at either woman again. The boarding house stood only half a block away, but the walk felt longer because people kept noticing the white dress. Lydia held her chin level. At the desk, Mrs. Barlow glanced at the mud on the hem, then at Jonah, then back to Lydia. The room was available. Payment, however, was required in advance. Lydia opened her purse and found 3 coins. Mrs. Barlow quietly pushed the register away. Jonah reached for his wallet. Lydia stopped him with one look before he touched it. She did not want charity from a stranger, especially not while the whole town seemed ready to turn every kindness into evidence against her. Jonah did not argue. He only nodded, as if refusing him had not offended him at all. That surprised her more than the offer itself. Most men Lydia knew treated help like a rope. Once you took hold of it, they expected the right to pull. Jonah stepped back and waited while she gathered what dignity the afternoon had left her. Under the boarding house awning, Lydia unfolded the mortgage again. This time she ignored the parcel number and studied her own signature. It was close enough to make her stomach tighten. The long stroke beneath Hale curved exactly as hers did. Then she saw the blot beside the capital H. Lydia leaned closer. The same tiny crescent of ink had appeared when her pen caught on the marriage license 3 days earlier. She remembered because Grant had laughed and called it her lucky mark, as if it meant nothing important. Her pulse changed. The mortgage claimed it had been signed 3 weeks before the wedding, yet the flaw in this signature matched a mark created only 3 days ago. Lydia pressed hands flat against the paper. She did not yet know how a copied signature could be proved or who might believe her, but one possibility had opened where there had been none before. The document might not have been forged weeks ago. It might have been created after Grant obtained the marriage license. Timing changed everything. Jonah did not take Lydia through the front door of Mercer Ranch as though he were bringing home someone to be rescued. He carried her bundle to the porch, showed her the washroom, and pointed toward a narrow bedroom at the end of the hall. He made it clear the room was hers for one night and that tomorrow could wait. Lydia noticed he never asked whether she had deserved what happened at the church. In the kitchen, Jonah set down stew, bread, and a cup of water. Lydia ate slowly because hunger made speed feel humiliating. When she finished, she asked what work needed doing. Jonah glanced toward a leaning stack of receipts and tax notices near the window. By morning, he needed them sorted by year and property. The offer mattered because it changed the shape of his kindness. She would not be staying as a debt. Before carrying the papers to the small desk, Lydia noticed a county tax receipt lying face up. The parcel number began with the same 3 digits as the mortgage hidden inside her sleeve. She stopped moving. Jonah saw where her attention had landed but did not explain. Instead, he pulled an old survey map from a drawer and flattened it beneath the lamp. The numbers were not identical. That relieved Lydia for only a second. Jonah traced one boundary with his finger, then another. The land named on her mortgage sat directly north of Mercer property, beside the wagon road cattle used during dry months to reach a spring. The paper in Lydia's hand changed again. What had looked like a private fraud could touch Jonah's ranch. Lydia asked whether anyone had tried to buy that northern ground before. Jonah shook his head and folded the map halfway, as if he suddenly disliked having it exposed. The tract had belonged to an old estate for years. No sale had been announced, and no neighbor had mentioned a transfer. That made the mortgage stranger, not clearer. Then Lydia remembered something Grant had asked weeks earlier while pretending to be interested in wedding expenses. He had wanted to know whether land north of Red Creek was cheaper than pasture near the river. At the time, she had answered casually because the question sounded ordinary. Now she could hear his exact tone in her memory. Jonah asked whether Grant had ever spoken about Mercer Ranch. Lydia looked at the map between them. She could have told him about that conversation. Instead, she said she could not remember anything useful. The lie was small, but it sat heavily between her ribs. For the first time, Lydia wondered whether Grant had chosen her before he ever pretended to love her. At first light, Lydia spread the mortgage, the marriage license, and Jonah's county tax receipts across the kitchen table. She did not begin with the signature. Instead, she studied the loan fee printed beneath the principal amount. It was too high for an ordinary land purchase. Jonah leaned over the figures, while Lydia traced the columns with one finger. The extra charge looked like a rush fee, the kind paid when someone wanted a filing moved through faster than usual. That question led to another. If Lydia had truly borrowed the money, why would she pay more to hurry a purchase she had never discussed? She turned the paper sideways and compared the date beside the notary seal with the date on her marriage license. Nothing obvious contradicted the mortgage. Then Jonah noticed the two signatures were almost unnaturally alike. The angle, spacing, and long sweep beneath Hale matched with mechanical precision. Lydia brought the lamp closer. Beside the capital H sat the tiny crescent of ink she had noticed beneath the boarding house awning. On the marriage license, the same blemish appeared in the same place. Not merely similar, identical. A pen could hesitate twice, but it could not leave the exact same accident twice. Someone had likely copied one signature from the other. The problem was that suspicion was not proof. Jonah asked, what could prove it? Lydia did not answer immediately. She remembered Grant collecting the marriage papers after she signed them, saying he would deliver everything to the clerk himself. She had thought the gesture considerate. Now it felt different. He had possessed a clean sample of her handwriting, her full legal name, her father's name, and every detail needed to make another document look convincing. Worse, he had held them before she ever saw the mortgage. If you believe Lydia has found the first real break in Grant's story, share your thought in the comments, because the smallest mark on this page may matter more than the largest accusation in town. Lydia, however, felt no triumph. A copied signature could still be dismissed as coincidence unless they found the original filing. She needed the county copy, its intake number, and the date it actually entered the record. Jonah offered to ride into Red Creek, but Lydia stopped him. If Grant had arranged the filing, someone at the county office might know his name, and arriving with accusations could warn the wrong person. They would ask to inspect the record, nothing more. Lydia folded the papers in order, then paused over the mortgage date. 3 weeks before the wedding, the marriage license had been signed 3 days ago. If her suspicion was right, the mortgage had been backdated by at least 18 days. That realization should have made the path clearer. Instead, it opened a darker possibility. If Grant could alter the date on one official-looking document, what else had he changed before disappearing? And would the county file still contain the version that could expose him? By mid-morning, Lydia had moved Jonah's ranch papers from the kitchen table to the small desk near the east window. The work should have been simple. Sort receipts, taxes, feed invoices, and water fees by year. Instead, one narrow receipt stopped her. The parcel number matched the first 3 digits on Grant's mortgage, but the description beneath it referred to an access easement Jonah paid to maintain each spring. She carried the receipt to Jonah without explaining her conclusion. He brought out the old survey map again, and together they compared the easement language with the tract named in the mortgage. The lines did not overlap, but they touched at one narrow point where cattle crossed toward the spring during dry weather. If control of that strip changed hands, access could be challenged, delayed, or made expensive enough to hurt the ranch. Jonah's first reaction was practical. He reached for a draft refinancing agreement he had planned to sign that afternoon, intending to secure winter feed before prices rose. Lydia asked to see it. The collateral description included the northern boundary, the easement, and all attached water rights. She read the paragraph twice. If the neighboring title was already being manipulated, signing now could drag Jonah's lender into the same dispute. She did not tell him what to do. She placed the mortgage beside the refinancing draft and showed him the two descriptions. Jonah studied them in silence. He had spent years making decisions alone, and Lydia could see that delaying a loan before winter went against every instinct he had. Still, he folded the agreement instead of signing it. That small motion changed something between them. For the first time, her judgment had altered a decision affecting his land. Lydia returned to the receipts, now looking for movement rather than numbers. A processing charge on Grant's mortgage had been sent through a private land office in Red Creek. 2 days later, Jonah's records showed a survey fee paid by someone requesting boundary stakes near the same northern road. Jonah had never ordered that survey. Lydia circled both entries, then checked the dates again. They were close enough to suggest one plan, not two accidents. The mortgage was no longer only about borrowing money under Lydia's name. Someone had been measuring the edge of Mercer Ranch while preparing the false purchase. That meant Grant's interest in her identity and his interest in Jonah's water access had developed side by side. Lydia felt the old humiliation rise, but this time it did not leave her powerless. Every receipt gave her something Grant had not expected her to notice. Near the bottom of the stack, she found one final entry, a transfer fee attached to a second parcel south of the spring. The payer's name was hidden behind an abbreviated company title, but the mailing address matched the land office that handled Grant's mortgage. Lydia set the receipt beside the map. The first tract could pressure Jonah from the north. The second sat beside the spring itself. She looked at Jonah, and neither of them needed to guess anymore. Grant had not chosen a random piece of land. He was building control around the ranch. Before sunrise, Jonah left a cup of coffee beside Lydia's papers and went to the barn without saying a word. She found it still warm when she came into the kitchen. His coat lay over the back of a chair, one cuff torn where a nail had caught it the day before. Lydia threaded a needle from the sewing basket, repaired the seam, and returned the coat exactly where she had found it. Neither gesture asked to be noticed immediately. Later, rain drove Jonah inside the barn while Lydia carried out a ledger he had asked her to check. The roof rattled under the storm. A horse came hard up the road, hooves striking mud in a fast, uneven rhythm. Lydia froze before she could stop herself. Her hand closed around the ledger. Jonah saw the fear cross her face, but he did not reach for her. He simply moved between Lydia and the open barn door and waited without asking her to explain anything yet. The rider turned out to be a ranch hand from 2 valleys over, looking for shelter until the rain eased. Lydia let out a breath she had been holding too long. Jonah still asked nothing. He showed the man where to tie his horse, then returned to the workbench as if Lydia's fear belonged to her and not to him. That restraint unsettled her more gently than comfort would have. Grant had always treated every weakness as an invitation to take control. Jonah seemed determined not to take anything away. That evening, Lydia found Jonah's repaired coat hanging by the kitchen door. Beside her place at the table sat another cup of coffee, though the rain had long since stopped. She almost smiled. Then her eyes fell on the map they had marked that morning. 2 parcels now pressed against Mercer land like closing fingers. Grant had used her name to move toward Jonah's water. Whatever happened next would not remain hers alone. For the first time, kindness itself felt dangerous. That frightened her deeply. After Jonah went to check the horses, Lydia packed the few things she had borrowed. She folded the plain dress Mrs. Mercer's sister had left years ago, wrapped her papers in cloth, and placed Jonah's ranch notes on the kitchen table. On top, she left the survey receipt, the transfer fee, and a short warning that Grant might be trying to surround the spring through separate purchases. If Lydia disappeared from the ranch, perhaps Grant would lose his reason to threaten Jonah directly. Fear made that poor logic feel merciful. At dawn, Jonah found the bedroom empty and the bed neatly made. For one sharp second, he thought Lydia had gone. Then he saw her footprints beyond the porch, leading toward the south road, and the notes she had left behind. He read the warning twice. Lydia had not run from him. She had tried to remove herself from the danger around his ranch. Jonah folded the paper and went after her. She had chosen danger alone to protect him. He intended to offer another choice instead. Jonah caught up with Lydia before she reached the South Fork. She had mud on the hem of her borrowed dress and the wrapped papers tucked beneath one arm. He did not tell her to return. He only said that leaving would not erase Grant's interest in the ranch, and that facing the danger alone would give Grant exactly what he wanted. Lydia looked back toward the distant roofline. After a long silence, she turned around beside him willingly again. They had barely reached the ranch gate when two riders appeared on the road. Grant Voss rode first, clean-shaven and dry beneath a dark coat despite the morning drizzle. Beside him came Deputy Ellis, carrying a leather case rather than a rifle. Grant dismounted with the calm manner of a man arriving for an appointment. He did not apologize for the empty church. He said Lydia had known about the loan, had signed it willingly, and was now inventing fraud because the purchase had gone badly. Lydia felt the accusation strike harder because Grant never raised his voice. He opened the leather case and produced another copy of the mortgage. This one carried a county certification stamp. He pointed to Lydia's birth date, her father's full name, her former address, and the exact spelling of a middle name she rarely used. Every detail made his story look stronger. Lydia understood then that his courtship had also been an inventory. Questions she had mistaken for tenderness had given him the pieces needed to build a convincing lie. Grant handed the paper to Jonah and asked whether he still intended to shelter a woman who had borrowed money under her own name and then denied it. Jonah read the page without defending Lydia. That restraint made Grant smile too soon. Jonah compared the certification with Lydia's copy, then asked one question: who held the original filing? Grant said the certified copy was enough. Jonah asked again whether he would object to checking the county intake record in person. For the first time, Grant's expression changed, only slightly. He looked toward Deputy Ellis before answering that clerks made mistakes and there was no reason to waste the morning. Lydia saw the hesitation and felt something inside her settle. A truthful man carrying proof should have wanted the original examined. Grant wanted the copy believed instead. If you were standing at that gate, with an official-looking document against Lydia and only her word on the other side, would you still trust her? Tell us in the comments. And remember that sometimes the smallest hesitation reveals more than the loudest accusation. Jonah folded the certified copy and handed it back. He said they would ride to the county office together. If Grant's paper was genuine, the record would support him. Grant could hardly refuse with the deputy watching. Lydia met Jonah's eyes. The stamp had frightened her minutes earlier. Now Grant's reluctance frightened her more. Why would a man with nothing to hide fear the ledger? Grant did not like being made to ride under the same conditions as everyone else. His irritation showed in small ways: the sharp pull on his reins, the way he kept Deputy Ellis between himself and Lydia, the glance he gave Jonah whenever the road narrowed. Jonah ignored all of it. He rode beside Lydia, not ahead of her, and said nothing that could be turned into a threat. The silence took away the fight Grant seemed to want. At the first rise beyond the ranch, Jonah asked to see both mortgage copies again. Grant refused at first, then handed over his certified page when Ellis reminded him the county office would compare everything anyway. Lydia unfolded her own copy across the saddle horn. The seals looked alike, the signatures looked alike. Even the typed legal description matched line for line. For several minutes, she found nothing useful, and doubt began pressing back into her chest. Then she stopped at the filing notation near the bottom margin. Her copy listed the record as Book 14, page 227. Grant's certified copy read Book 14, page 227 too, but the page number had been typed in a newer county style, with a small dash before the entry code. Lydia had seen that format on Jonah's recent tax papers. Older records used a plain number. She asked Ellis when the clerk's office changed the system. The deputy could not give an exact date, but he remembered the new indexing method had started only that spring. Lydia looked again at the mortgage date. The paper claimed to be older than the indexing change. The discovery did not prove who altered the document. It did not prove Grant had forged anything himself, but it created a problem he could not explain away with a copied signature or a clerical typo. A document supposedly filed before the system changed appeared to carry the newer format. Jonah watched Lydia rather than Grant. He could see she had found something, but he waited for her to decide what to do with it. That mattered. Since the church, nearly everyone had spoken about Lydia as if her choices no longer belonged to her. Jonah had protected her without taking over her voice. At the edge of Red Creek, he finally asked whether she still wanted to continue. Lydia looked toward the county building at the end of Main Street. She could already see people turning to watch the riders approach. Going inside meant facing the same town that had whispered about her wedding and her debt. Leaving meant letting those whispers harden into fact. She folded both observations into memory and nodded. By the time they reached the county steps, Lydia was no longer trying to prove that she had never signed the loan. She was trying to prove something more dangerous, that the paper had been created after the date it claimed to exist. The county records room smelled of dust, lamp oil, and old paper. Ruth Bell, the clerk, listened without interrupting, while Lydia laid both mortgage copies on the counter. Grant stood several feet away, with Deputy Ellis beside him. Jonah remained near Lydia, but did not speak for her. Ruth compared the parcel number, the seal, and the legal description. Then she disappeared between two shelves and returned, carrying a bound ledger and the original filing packet under one arm, carefully sealed in twine. For one terrible moment, the original seemed to support Grant. Lydia's full name was there. So was the same signature, the same mortgage amount, and the same parcel. The county seal was genuine. Grant gave a quiet breath, almost a laugh. Lydia felt the floor tilt beneath her. Then Ruth ignored the signature entirely. She ran one finger down the intake ledger, stopped at the number stamped on the packet, and frowned before turning back 3 pages to compare the surrounding entries. The number did not belong where the document said it did. Papers filed on the mortgage date carried numbers more than 100 entries lower. This intake number belonged to records received after Lydia and Grant had signed their marriage license. Grant immediately called it a clerical mistake. Ruth did not argue. She simply placed the intake ledger beside the mortgage. The order was continuous. No pages were missing. No block of numbers had been reassigned. The paper had entered the county office later than the date printed across its face. That changed the question. Lydia no longer needed anyone to believe that the signature looked wrong. She needed to show where the signature came from. Ruth retrieved the marriage license. Lydia placed it beside the mortgage and pointed to the crescent-shaped blot beside the capital H. Ruth leaned closer. Jonah saw it too. The flaws were identical in size, angle, and position. Even the faint break in the underline matched. 2 handwritten signatures could resemble each other. 2 accidents could not repeat themselves so perfectly. Grant said Lydia might have signed both papers at the same sitting. That explanation lasted less than a minute. Ruth turned the marriage license over and read its filing date aloud. It had been signed 18 days after the date printed on the mortgage. Yet the intake ledger showed the mortgage itself had not entered county records until after the license existed. The sequence finally made sense. Someone could have copied Lydia's fresh signature onto a document, backdated that document, and then filed it as though it had existed for weeks. Ruth was careful not to call that proof of Grant's guilt. She said it proved the record could not have been created when it claimed. Lydia understood the difference, and so did Grant. His confidence had narrowed into impatience. But Ruth was not finished. She opened the property packet attached to the mortgage and unfolded an older survey. The disputed tract touched a recorded easement leading from Mercer Ranch to the spring. Another note linked the tract to a second parcel south of the water. Lydia stared at the map until the purpose became visible. Grant had not used her identity merely to steal borrowed money. The loan put a clean, unrelated name between him and land that could pressure Jonah's ranch from 2 sides. If the transfer stood, whoever controlled those parcels could challenge the water route, raise access costs, or make Mercer Ranch difficult to finance. Lydia had been chosen because Grant believed no one would look beyond the bride he abandoned. Ruth closed the survey and returned to the intake ledger. The fraud had shape now, but one question mattered. A false document could be traced only if they knew who delivered it. Lydia watched Ruth turn to the submission column. There, beside the intake number, was a line for the filer's name. Ruth placed her finger over it and looked at Grant. Ruth kept her finger over the submission line until the room had gone completely still. Lydia could hear rain ticking against the county windows and Grant's boot scraping once across the floor. Then Ruth moved her hand. The name written beside the intake number was Grant Voss. No initials, no agent, no law office. Grant himself had delivered the mortgage packet. Deputy Ellis stepped closer, but Ruth raised one hand. A name in a ledger proved who filed a paper. It did not, by itself, prove who forged it. Grant seized on that distinction immediately. He said Lydia could have prepared everything and asked him to file it. He called their broken wedding a private matter and the mortgage a bargain she now regretted. Ruth listened, then opened the authorization section of the packet. There was no power of attorney, no agency statement, and no witness authorizing Grant to act for Lydia. The lender had accepted him as the courier for a loan supposedly signed by a woman who was nowhere in the filing record. Ruth then compared the mortgage date with the intake sequence and the marriage license. The contradiction was no longer a theory. The mortgage claimed Lydia had signed it 18 days before the license existed, yet its county intake number belonged to the period after that license was filed. Beside both signatures sat the same crescent of ink. Grant called that coincidence. Ruth placed the two sheets side by side and asked him to explain how the same accidental blot could appear in the same place on documents supposedly signed weeks apart. Grant had no answer. Then Ruth opened the older property map. She traced the easement from Mercer Ranch to the spring, the northern tract named in Lydia's false mortgage, and the second parcel beside the water. Lydia explained the survey fee she had found in Jonah's records and the transfer charge tied to the same land office. One document alone might have looked harmless. Together they showed a pattern. Someone had used Lydia's identity to place a seemingly independent buyer between Jonah and the water his cattle depended on. The room changed then. People who had been watching Lydia began watching Grant instead. Grant tried one last retreat. He said land deals failed every day, and that none of this proved Lydia was innocent of the debt. Ruth answered by reading the filing sequence aloud from the ledger, then the date of the marriage license, then Grant's name as filer. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Each fact removed another place for his story to hide. Finally, she marked the transaction disputed for suspected fraud and forgery and ordered notice sent to the lender before further enforcement. Deputy Ellis took possession of copies from both sides and asked Grant to remain available for questioning. Grant looked toward Jonah as if hoping anger might give him a different kind of escape. Jonah never moved from Lydia's side. He had not won this for her. He had given her a roof, time, and enough quiet to keep reading. Lydia had found the mismatched dates, the copied blot, the land pattern, and the question Grant had assumed no abandoned bride would know to ask. That realization steadied her more than vindication. If Lydia's patience has changed the way you see her, tell us in the comments and share this story. Truth can survive being buried. When Ruth returned the marriage license, Lydia held it without shaking. Her name was hers again. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street looked ordinary. That frightened her in a new way. She had spent days needing somewhere to run. Now, she was free to choose where to stay. 3 days after the county hearing, Lydia stood in the small bedroom at Mercer Ranch with her suitcase open on the bed. The papers that had nearly ruined her name were tied neatly with string, and the marriage license rested beneath them. Nothing prevented her from leaving now. Ruth Bell had confirmed the disputed debt would not be enforced against her while Grant faced investigation, and the morning stage left Red Creek at 8. Jonah had already placed her wages on the kitchen table, counted to the day, as though her work had always been worth paying for. Beside the coins lay no plea, no promise, and no reason designed to make staying easier than leaving. That absence mattered more than Lydia expected. Grant had spent months turning affection into leverage, learning which questions would open doors and which kindnesses could later be collected like debts. Jonah had done the opposite. He had opened a door, then left the choice of crossing it to her. Lydia closed the suitcase without fastening it and carried it as far as the porch. The ranch spread before her in the pale morning. Corrals dark with rain, horses breathing steam, and the northern ridge beyond the fields where Grant had tried to build his trap. She could leave that ridge behind. For the first time, leaving would be freedom rather than escape. Jonah came from the barn carrying 2 cups of coffee. He saw the suitcase and stopped several steps away, giving Lydia enough space to make the moment entirely hers. She looked toward the road, then back at the house, the kitchen window, and the desk where her unfinished ledgers waited. Slowly, she carried the suitcase inside again and set it beside the bedroom door. When she returned to the kitchen, Jonah had placed 1 cup beside her ledger, exactly where he had left the first one. Lydia opened the book, moved the empty chair beside her away from the table, and left room for him. Home, she realized, was the place where an open door remained a choice.